Welcome back to my channel, my friends. It's so good to see you back. After we have talked about why we should start running so that we have our own individual motivation for our running journey, today we are talking about how we make running easy and how we can create an approach that is tailored for each and every one of us instead of following blindly some numbers on the internet. Because let's be honest, everyone who has tried to look something about running up on the internet, the world all over a sudden seems like a very confusing place because everyone and their dog knows what you should do for your running with specific and absolute numbers. And guess what? All the answers you find do not align. Therefore, in this video, I explain the science behind the running in a simple way so that you are able to create your own individual approach that makes you happy, because after all, it's you who should enjoy your running. When looking up science-backed approaches on the internet, sometimes it's very hard for beginners to understand because they are using words that you've never heard of in contexts you don't understand. Therefore, I wanted to split this video into 3 sections. First, we are talking about the bare basics and some physical terms. If you have experience with running already, this is probably the part that you can skip, but since this is a beginner's guide, I wanted to include it anyway. Second on the agenda is your running economy and your heart rate, because these are very important physiological factors in the process of running. And last but not least, we are talking about training models and tools so that you are able to put the knowledge from science into action and create an individual running routine that makes you happy. And without further ado, let's start with the first section. Because we are beginners, we start at the very beginning. And when I say that, I mean vocabulary. And you might be laughing right now. And if you have experience with running, you can skip to the next timestamp. But I wanted to include this because especially for people whose mother tongue is not English, like me, some terminology out there can be very confusing because you've never heard of this in this kind of context and it doesn't make sense. Because when looking at training and when people describe what they do on the internet, they use funny words you've never heard of. They say something like, I ran a 10K with a 4:25 pace. Let me get something straight in the very beginning. I'm very much against comparing yourself to others because it will take the joy out of it for you and you will be unable to see your own progress that you've made compared to your past self just because you are comparing to that random person online and get frustrated in the process. However, I find it quite helpful to understand the words and to put things into perspective for yourself and also to manage different training environments and gadgets that you are using in the running process. So please be kind to yourself. And now let's decode this whole thing. The underlying physical metrics in the running space are distance and speed. So basically the amount of where you are going and how fast you are going while doing so. 10K in the context of running has nothing to do with money, but just is the short version of 10 kilometers. There are some things to keep in mind when talking about distance, apart from the well-known problem of the clash of the metrical systems, kilometers versus miles. But even apart from that, distance does not equal distance. Whenever people are talking about distance, you need to keep in mind that it's not easily comparable because of things like the elevation or the ground you are running on, or whether you are running indoors on a machine or outdoors. When you put these 2 metrics together, you get the metric that is most commonly used to describe your runs, which is the pace. Pace is your distance at time or vice versa. Mostly, at least where I'm from, pace is referred to as minutes per kilometer. So a 4:25 pace in that context means that you need 4 minutes and 25 seconds to complete 1 kilometer. But because that would be too easy and would make things very simple all over the world, pace can be displayed in many different ways and forms. When you are using different devices, for example, your smartwatch and the treadmill, pace can be a very different thing. When I used the treadmill for running for the first time, I knew what the pace of my last run was like because I had it recorded on my watch and I thought I had configured it correctly just to literally crash into the front part of the treadmill. And that was making me feel really stupid, as if not feeling very incompetent already, because let's be honest, with all the lifelong gym bros and athletes, gyms in general can be an intimidating place as a beginner, but I overcame this and tried to figure out why my outdoor pace, which I was struggling with at the time, was actually a walking pace on the treadmill. And guess what? The treadmill was configured in kilometers per hour, whereas my watch was telling me the pace in minutes per kilometer. So please learn from my mistake and look that each device is telling you how it's displaying pace so that you'd have a happy start into your indoor running. Let's now come to the second part on the agenda, which is your running economy and your heart rate zones. And I know what you might be thinking right now. Why on earth should I, as a total beginner, think about something like heart rate zones? And I understand that because I was thinking the same. But I hope that this section will make it clear why it's very beneficial for the joy in the running process to understand what your body is doing while you run. As we have already talked about in the last video, your cardiovascular system is very important for the running process. Therefore, now we go into some theoretical knowledge about that system to understand what your body is doing while running and to then tackle the problems you have with running. First off, we define a concept and two exercise styles because they will occur in the next parts of the video, which are your running economy and aerobic versus anaerobic exercise. Your running economy refers to how efficiently a runner is using oxygen at a given pace, which means it is measuring how much energy is expended while running. Factors influencing your running economy include biomechanics, muscle fiber composition, and training adaptations. Aerobic exercise involves activities performed at moderate intensity, where your body is using oxygen efficiently to produce energy, such as low-intensity running or cycling. Anaerobic exercise, on the other hand, consists of high-intensity efforts, such as sprinting or heavy lifting, where the body relies on energy sources that do not require oxygen, leading to quicker fatigue. These different systems are important to understand the concepts that we are about to get into, which are your VO2 max and your lactate threshold and how they relate to your heart rate zones. Especially the VO2 max and the according heart rate zones are all over the internet right now. But without knowing how to handle that, these terms are useless because they are very individual physiological markers and cannot be calculated with your age. VO2 max is a measure of the maximum amount of oxygen your body can utilize during intense exercise, indicating the upper limit of your aerobic capacity. A higher VO2 max means you can sustain more intense efforts aerobically, improving endurance performance. Aerobic training and high-intensity interval training can both help increase your VO2 max, allowing for a greater capacity for oxygen usage during exercise. Your lactate threshold is the point during exercise where lactate, which is a byproduct of anaerobic metabolism, is accumulating in your bloodstream faster than it can be cleared. This accumulation of lactate in your blood is the reason why you feel fatigued. Training at or just below this threshold can improve your body's efficiency in clearing lactate, allowing an individual to sustain high intensities without fatigue. You can see that with moderate intensity, your lactate level stays somewhat in the broadly same base level. At a certain point, which is your lactate threshold, the lactate starts to accumulate in your blood. At an even higher level, you see that this accumulation starts to grow exponentially, leaving you feeling as if your lungs and your muscles are about to give up on you. Now that we understand these two physiological markers a little bit better, we kind of get the idea why running for us sometimes feels so exhausting. And it's because of the lactate accumulating in your blood faster than it can be cleared, leaving us feeling as if we are running for kilometers and hours already while we are still quite close to our starting point. Improving both your VO2 max and your lactate threshold allows you to work harder and longer, balancing your aerobic efficiency and the ability to manage anaerobic efforts. And therefore it's important to orient our training around these two physiological markers to improve our training and performance while having fun doing so. And by now, these are very abstract, and to measure these, you would need a running lab or a doctor's office and the right equipment and everything. And so to make it a little bit more tangible, we are using the linear relationship between the VO2 max and your heart rate, which arises at intensities above 50% of your VO2 max. So the different intensity ranges of your VO2 max can now be described through heart rate zones. The different heart rate zones make it easy for us to structure our training and to aim for the results you are wishing for by managing the resources that you have. namely your body's capacity and energy, as well as time, because we don't want to waste any time on inefficient training. The 5 heart rate zones that you see displayed here are the ones that are most commonly referred to on the internet. But to spice it up and to confuse the general population, scientists sometimes also refer to 3 intensity zones instead of 5 heart rate zones. But as you can see, they somewhat go hand in hand, and the lactate threshold is the marker that splits intensity zone 1 and 2 and heart rate zone 2 and 3. It is therefore the marker from which percentage of your VO2 max your training starts to feel unsustainable for longer periods of time. And there is good news for us, because we don't want to be exhausted all of the time when we are training, especially when we are training in our free time, as we are no pro athletes, and we also need, apart from that free time, to recover properly. And that's why it's so beautiful that scientific research has shown that low intensity training, so basically anything below your lactate threshold, is very effective for training the aerobic system. And that is because of the training in this low intensity, you cause your body to make adaptations to make it more efficient for the running process, such as the ability to sustain muscles with oxygen for a sustained period of time. In addition to that, it also trains your brain. As your body is practicing this running motion, it gets used to the movement patterns and gets rid of all the inefficiencies that you have in that running movement pattern over time. And all these adaptations caused by the low intensity training lead then to bettering your steady state pace that you can sustain for a very long period of time. I think now we kind of understand what happens, and we have the basics of what the metabolism and your body does when you're running. And I think it's time that we stop talking about the theoretical part and start implementing what we know now by using training models and tools. In order to create a running routine that makes you happy and that you can sustain for a long time while you are not a full-time athlete, you can have a glimpse of what pros are doing and look at the training models they are using, because they get one thing right. They are very, very efficient with their training because they have a limited amount of time, so they make the most out of it to maximize performance output. And therefore, we can look at what they get right to get the best results with the time given. These training models all have one thing in common. They prioritize low intensity training and add in high intensity sessions. So they basically get rid of what we as beginners usually do when we attempt a run, which is somewhere in the middle of that. We're going above our lactate threshold, so we feel exhausted quite quickly, but we are also not doing sprints or intervals or doing a training that is an all-out short-time energy output. And therefore, we have a quick glimpse into polarized training and pyramidal training. For polarized training, you spend 70 to 80% of your training time in your intensity zone 1, heart rate zone 2, and the remaining of the time, so 10 to 20%, you spend in your high intensity zones, where you're doing sprints, intervals, or high intensity training, and 10 to 0% in intensity zone 2, which is somewhere in the middle. Pyramidal training is quite similar. The only difference is that the remaining time that you have is equally split between intensity zone 2 and intensity zone 3. So what we can take away for ourselves is that we should spend the larger amount of time that we have and we want to spare for training in low intensity training, and then add in a few high intensity sessions. But don't worry, you don't have to get rid of the mid-intensity runs forever, because from time to time, they are quite good to see where you are at with your performance and to push yourself in a middle distance and see how your body is reacting to maybe this new pace or this new elevation gain or something. But it's important to keep in mind that they are not as beneficial for your training improvement. Now that we know how we can split our training, there's the one big remaining question. I can see it. It's a good question. How do I know what my zones are? Honestly, the best way is to go by your feeling. Your body is very, very good at giving you signals, whether it is too hard or too light or somewhat challenging but still okay. But because as beginners it's very hard to read these signals correctly without guidance from outside, in the following I'm describing some tools that can be helpful in your running journey. But please do not fixate yourself on those, because you will have daily fluctuations. Your energy levels will be different from day to day due to many different factors that influence your everyday life. So do not get too focused on specific values, but see each and every day how these broad values that you maybe find for yourself are feeling on that particular day. Because after all, we are no robots, I hope. A great tool to see whether you are within your aerobic threshold or you are going above it is the talking test. It is a great way to measure your body's signals of whether you are going too fast or going with your steady state pace that is comfortable for you.
This is what the talking test should look like. You should be able to maintain a conversation while running and not be out of breath after a few seconds and needing to stop or something. So yeah, I think it's all about seeing whether you can still talk while you run and whether this is hard for you or not, and that's it.
But if you are somewhat a data-driven athlete, you can use heart rate monitors. They can be very helpful to see how you are going without having to do the talking test, or to see where you are in that range above your lactate threshold, because there you obviously don't pass the talking test, but to see whether you are still in your intensity zone 2 or in intensity zone 3, it can be very helpful. You can also use heart rate monitors to kind of connect a certain feeling and the signals of your body to that heart rate value, and to see how your body's react to new paces and stuff. Many smartwatches have heart rate sensors built in, but they are also obviously heart rate monitors that are a bit more precise because they solely focus on that feature. But now be very cautious. Please do not stick to the heart rates that you find assigned to your age online. Heart rate zones are very, very individual. These calculations by taking your age, subtracting that from a certain value, is actually not what your heart rate zones are all about. So if you want to test where your VO2 max or your maximum energy output is for you, and from there calculate all the different heart rate zones, I link a test for that down below. And also keep in mind, even when you are doing that, even when you are calculating your maximum heart rate and calculate all your zones, they will never be as accurate because of the devices and the techniques you use compared to getting your lactate threshold tested in a running lab or a doctor's office. So if you want to get pretty precise about this is probably the part where you should consult professional help. But in my opinion, it makes more sense to get a broad idea where your zones are, and then maybe combine it with the talking test and see whether the pace and the heart rate that you have assigned to your lactate threshold, so your intensity zone 1, is actually doable with the talking test, and that it all fits together and makes sense. So please go by your feeling and do not stick to these values too much. It's just to get a broad idea whether you are pushing yourself too hard for your low intensity sessions. That's basically it. Because in your all out sessions, you should go all out anyway. And I think your body is very good at giving you that sign. And at this point, our little science dive is over. Now you have all the knowledge and tools to create your own running routine and to make it enjoyable for you. The most important part about this is that you feel empowered, because it's you who should enjoy your training, and enjoyable training will always make you go longer and stick with it instead of feeling unmotivated because the training is not enjoyable for you. Also, it makes absolutely no sense to start running for the purpose of leading a healthy life and have a happy, healthy future, and then burn out in the process because you stick to all these parameters and you put pressure on yourself and you are not seeing the results quick enough that you want to see. It doesn't matter if you would like to spend an hour every other week on your training or several hours per week to improve. It's just good to keep in mind where your priority with the given time that you have and with the time that you would like to spare for running, that you use this time efficiently to have a good, enjoyable process for the running while listening to and protecting your body and mind. And the honest reality is, progress will take time. Maybe your attitude or your motivation towards running will change quickly, but the results will take patience and time. And do not get frustrated in the beginning. Sometimes intensity zone 1 or heart rate zone 2, so within your aerobic threshold, feels more like a walking zone. Or maybe you can't sustain your pace for the entire run, then just take some walking breaks. But don't power through just because you fixate on that pace you want to reach, and then you end up somewhere above your lactate threshold level, you cut your run short, and you will end up training in the zones that are not helping you progress as much as you would like to. Trust the process and do what feels right to you. And if these middle distance, mid-intensity runs are more enjoyable for you than low intensity or very high intensity trainings, then just go for it. You are your own boss here. The most important part is that you enjoy your training and do not feel if this is torture. As we have seen, most of the parameters that go into running are very, very individual. So while the improvement process that happens in your body and the adaptations remain the same, the implementation and the actual actions that you do are very, very different, especially when it's about how you feel while doing so. So be guided by yourself. Do not compare yourself or your progress or your stats to anyone else but your past self. And please keep in mind that this is your journey and has nothing to do with anyone else in the world. Because if you find the right challenge for you and combine that with the approaches and the knowledge from science, you will surprise yourself with progress. So take the leap of faith and just try it out and push yourself. But always listen to your own body and ask yourself, how does it make me feel? Don't get me wrong. Setting yourself up for a challenge and trying a new training approach will be hard at times. And there will be days where the energy level is low, or maybe something feels harder than the days before. That is totally normal. And setting yourself up for improvement does mean you have to challenge yourself. But it should never be torture, or it should never feel like you are doing something to your body that is harming you. So keep in mind that you should keep it balanced because you want to enjoy life and enjoy your training for a long, long time. I'm more than hopeful that this video helps you untangle the leaves of the jungle of running, and that with the knowledge what your body does while you run, you can create your own individual training approach that will help you improve your running while feeling great. And as always, all the papers are in the description box down below. And if you have any further questions, just leave them in the comments. And if you try it out, just let me know in the comments. I would be really interested in what your feedback is to that. If you are enjoying these kind of videos, you know what you can do. And please stay curious, look after yourself, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.